Hey everyone! Today I want to show you guys how I edited this photo that I took and made it into something like this. Okay, so this should be fun. Yes, the change is dramatic, and believe me, it only takes a few setting change to make it look close to something like that. But do notice that today what I did was actually, with this photo, I first edited using Lightroom, and then I imported that into Photoshop and applied a couple settings. Truthfully, I think it might have been possible to achieve the same setting just by using Lightroom, but I was feeling like sometimes I do have more control over the tiny bit more details of what I want to change if I use Photoshop. And that's the reason why I use both. And this would be a good opportunity as well to show you sort of my process when I use both of them. So without further ado, the first thing I would do here is adjust the exposure. And I've already done this edit before, so I'm just gonna set it to the same settings as what I set it to. And as you might notice, the initial shot is pretty dark, and the reason for that is I wanted to maintain as many details as possible. If I had shot it with high exposure to begin with, then I wouldn't have captured as many of these architectural details. And then the next thing I changed was the highlights. Basically, I set it to -40 just to, because in the beginning things were kind of blown up and I wanted to not make it as blown up. So we got -40, and then for the shadows, I set it to +64, and that's where things are beginning to look like it's pleasing to the eyes, because now we're revealing a lot of the details on both the buildings and our model right here. And for the whites, I didn't touch it at all because I just felt that it was at a place I was happy with. I didn't feel like changing it at this time. And as for blacks, I have set it to 49 just to even brighten up the entire image so that I could reveal even more details. For texture, I set it to 45 because that's the place where I felt that it's starting to define some of the edges right here. And I'm pretty happy with this. And I did not touch the other settings in here other than the temperature because things are pretty yellow, right? So I wanted to balance it out a little bit. And here around 2400 is about where it starts to look a little bit more balanced with a bit of gold and a bit of blue. Fantastic. Now, I didn't touch the tone curve here at all in Lightroom. I touched it on Photoshop. You could do either, but when I did the editing, I just felt doing very minimal work on the Lightroom side. As for here, I felt like I wanted to adjust the yellows a little bit to make it look a little bit more gold. So I did that. And then I wanted to make the gold pop up even more. So something like that. And brighten it up a little bit just to even make it pop. So here where we're seeing that it looks a little bit more gold, which now looks better with the blue that we have here on the railing of this building. And we're not going to touch split toning right here because we're going to do something similar in Photoshop. And as for sharpening, we are going to first choose what we want to sharpen. So around here is good. Here we could see we are sharpening the edges of the face and the skirt, the buildings. So that's at a good place. Now, as for sharpening amount, it's really hard to see. I would definitely just look at this image right here to know how much I'm sharpening, and actually even perhaps zooming in to see what's happening as I sharpen. As you can see, like if the sharpening is 0, it almost doesn't do anything, right? But if I go to like 70, then I see a little bit more of the effect. Perhaps not obvious right now, but before, after. It's pretty subtle. So now, about the noise reduction. Since it was pretty dark, there's a lot of noise on her face. So this is just to smoothen that out. So I set it to around 39. So now that looks a little better, right? If we zoom out, things are looking smoother. So that's pretty nice. And then we'll just check these two. This is just to remove to correct any distortion, as well as remove any vignetting that we don't really need of. So there we have it. And now I exported this into a JPEG and then imported it into Photoshop. So I'm gonna do all the changes that I have and go to the original photo. So here's what we have, and here's what we have imported. And one thing I forgot to do here is to actually also crop this, because right now it's not really exactly symmetrical, right? Here on the left side is a little bit longer. So I just had to simply adjust this such that it was like everything seems more symmetrical. So here's about, yeah, I think here's about right. And then I move it up a little bit just to capture a little more of that V shape, at the risk of cutting a little bit of those legs, which I think was fine for my case. So that's how it looked like, and that's how it looked like when I imported it. So now moving on here, I moved on right onto doing some adjustments. So let's go over the adjustments I did there. So first of all, I'll undo some of these changes. And the first thing I did was to adjust the hue and saturation. And the only hue and saturation I adjusted was the yellows. So in here, we could see that I simply made the saturation of yellows up to 30 to make it more saturated, to pop it up even more, just to give that wow factor. And then that's the only thing I adjusted there. And the next thing I did, which is more of a real trial and error, is putting on a gradient map using this hue and gradient map. And I actually spent a lot of time finding the right adjustment. And really, this is honestly just kind of a trial and error, how you feel about the picture. And in this scenario, I really wanted the darks, which is around here on the left side, the shadows, to be more of a golden tone, to put more of a golden tone. And as for the highlights, I wanted to put more of a softer tone, but not too blue. So I felt like this was sort of the teal color that I wanted. And then once I chose that good spot, then I simply decreased the opacity to the level that I was happy with. So I think initially I was playing with around 18 or maybe even 28. And I felt, okay, that seems like that could be a nice complement with the overall picture. And then I simply put it to 8%. And notice how dramatic, how initially here everything's pretty dark, but when I added this, it sort of gave it a little bit of a fade, which really is a matter of personal taste, but it's something I kind of like for my own personal style. And the next is the curves. This is just making the contrast better between the highlights and the shadows. And notice how things look more contrasted between the model and the background. The model definitely popped up even more. And this is how my curves look like. This is, again, trial and error. Basically, I just was doing more of the S-shaped curve and then pretty much adding a little bit more shadow, darkening the shadow a little bit, and then but raising the darkest place, and then lifting up some of the midtones a little bit. And I simply had to brighten up the picture just a little bit. And here we have, yeah, a pretty good spot, a pretty good place to start doing the final adjustments. So what I did here was, before I had to sort of even out the skin tone, I created a new layer, which I'll show you. And then simply what I did here was apply image, which is basically applying all of the adjustments that we have in the layer below. So now here, we simply do image and apply image. Click normal. And it will simply be the same image that you have. So you won't notice any difference here, but now this is just the combined of all of these layers. And now with frequency separation, that's a little trick we could do to sort of make the skin tone more even, do some of that adjustment. And the way I did this is simply use an actions that I downloaded from the internet. So click on actions, and I had this frequency separation 16-bit, which I will link down below on the description. And I simply applied that, and for the low frequency, I would use the mixer brush to here, mixer brush, copy my settings here for the wetness, load, mix and flow. And then I simply started moving this brush onto the, kind of like moving the highlights to the shadows that I want to get rid of. And so this is the original. So I would simply do that. And then in the end, it looked like this, which makes the face look more flattering. As for the high frequency, this is more towards getting rid of some of the textures I didn't want. And that includes some of this hair that's fizzling out in here that I want to get rid of. So notice how I got rid of them using both the low frequency and high frequency. And with the high frequency, I simply use clone stamp tool to get rid of it. I know that I didn't cover that much during this video, but it's something I could cover in the future. And lastly, in the picture, we have this thing that's, in my eyes, sort of distracting towards the whole thing, because I want it just to be the dark green, the gold, the brown, and this turquoise right here. And now all of a sudden there's a little bit of red. So I simply chose this spot right here, applied the layer mask, so that I'm only adjusting the saturation of that area, and then I simply desaturated that so that it's not noticeable. And voila, here we go. Here we have the final edit for our image. And this is the before, sorry. This is the before and this is the after. I hope you enjoyed this video and hit like and subscribe if you want to see more.